light, remembering that flame isn't just a tool, it's a teacher. Remembering that the most ancient magic is not in scrolls, but in stillness. The Flameborn realized they weren't just carrying the flame. They were carrying each other. She knelt, placed her hand on the ground, and felt heat. When laughter echoed in the clearing, at times it pulsed. When tears fell on the stones, at times it slept. When the world dreamed. Through it all, Ember stayed, watching, listening, learning. And the more she learned, the more the flame changed. She understood it better, but also because it understood her. Those who refused the cold or the dark and chose flame instead. You know the story, you've heard it before. But what you may not have heard is what happened to those who refused to choose a side. The elders saw the change in her and knew something old has awakened. They called themselves the Spark Council. And they asked questions adults had forgotten how to ask. Can fire teach us something we don't yet know? Each child carried only a single coal from their home hearth. Together they formed a ring. No chanting, no spells, just presence. And then, without warning, the earth breathed. The ashes glowed. A flame rose, not violent, but vast. Not wild, but awake. It didn't burn the children. It recognized them. Is flame still a guide? Or are we guiding it? What if flame is not the end, but the beginning? The elders listened. It's not with fear, but with respect. The scrolls had ended, but the story had not. And the next chapter, it seemed, would be written in new flame. Word was sent to Elderwood, to the Ash Vault, to the flame sanctuaries of the north. Firekeepers, philosophers, and soul listeners gathered for a council. The question was simple. Do we awaken it, or let it rest? Ravi had once said. Not all fire is meant to be carried. But Ember whispered something new. Some fires carry us. Those who refused the cold or the dark and chose flame instead. But every era, no matter how peaceful, carries its own questions. And the newest generation born, not in resistance, but in remembrance, had questions their elders could not answer. Here, children were not taught how to protect the flame. They were taught to become it. They studied silence, shadows, softness. They meditated by firelight. They learned to write an ember script, a style of poetry meant only to be read beside real flames. But even in this place of beauty and balance, something began to stir. A curiosity, a pull. One that the old scrolls had never warned about. Why do we still light candles when the world is calm? What is flame for if there's nothing left to fight? The answers would come from the children of the spark. They say that after the Great Reckoning, the world split into two halves, Ravi had once said. Not all fire is meant to be carried. Ember whispered something new. Some fires carry us. In the heart of a sunlit valley stood the Flameborn Academy, a place, not of war, but of wonder. Ember, the girl who glowed among the students, was a girl named Ember, not for fire, but for the warmth she left wherever she walked. She was quiet, often watching flames instead of speaking. But when she did speak, people listened not, because she was loud, but because her words glowed. She had questions no one else asked. What if the flame wants to go somewhere? What if we're holding it back? One night, while walking through the forest behind the academy, she felt it. A flicker in her chest, a pulse in the air, a fire. Not around her, but ahead of her. And it was calling. Without telling anyone, Ember followed the call into the wild. She carried no lantern, no compass. What Ember had discovered was not a fire, it was a memory of one. Ember returned to the academy, eyes wide with knowing. For the first time in flame-keeping history, the council was led by children. Under moonlight, Ember led a group of 10 young Flameborn back to the stone clearing. What they had awakened was not a fire that needed tending, it was a living flame. It responded to emotion, dimmed when someone lied. That day the world shifted. The Flameborn realized they weren't just carrying the flame, they were carrying each other. That day, the world shifted. The years passed, the children grew, and still the flame remained. At times it flared. As the years turned to decades, the Flameborn Academy became a sanctuary. One evening, as Ember sat by the sleeping fire, a student approached. So it goes. The tale of Ember and the Spark Council, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful magic is the quietest, the most patient, the most willing to simply be. Welcome to the channel. Once upon a time, nestled between mountains and sea, there lived a tribe that cherished storytelling. Every full moon, they'd gather round fires and share tales of love and loss, courage and change. With determination, she navigated through treacherous paths and solved riddles left by spirits of the mountain. Finally, she found it, a flame that burned without fuel, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. As she approached, the flame reacted, growing brighter, and Ember felt an overwhelming sense of connection to her ancestors. But times were changing. These stories were being written down in books, locked away in libraries. The connection to the ancient practice was fading. Over time, Ember and her friends found that the flame had become a living archive of their culture, preserving their history and passing it down to future generations. In the aftermath, fear and division threatened to consume the community, but Ember had an idea. She gathered the people around the flame, inviting them to share stories of resilience, courage, and hope. As the stories were shared, the flame glowed brighter, filling the darkness with warmth and light. It reminded them of their strength, their unity, and their ability to overcome even the toughest challenges. It became their tradition to gather around its flickering light, sharing their joys and sorrows, hopes and dreams. She noticed that certain themes elicited particular responses from the flame. The flame reacted not just to the subject matter of the stories, but to the emotions they evoked. Joyful stories produced a bright, cheerful flame. Sad tales created a soft, flickering light. Fearful stories made it crackle nervously, while hopeful narratives filled it with a steady, calming glow. For example, stories of courage caused it to burn brighter, while tales of love made it glow a gentle amber. It became clear that the stories weren't just about what they said, but how they made them feel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to create more enchanting stories for you. Until next time, keep reading, keep dreaming, and always remember the magic that lies within stories. The flame was responding to their collective emotional landscape, acting as a guide to help them process and understand their feelings. Stories of loss, on the other hand, made it flicker slowly, and adventure sparked it into a lively dance. Ember and the others began to consciously incorporate different emotions into their tales. Creating a balanced mix of joy, sorrow, fear, and hope, they learned to lean into the feelings that stories evoked, embracing the full range of human emotions and using them to connect with each other on a deeper level. Yet there was something more. Ember noticed patterns in the flame's behavior. It responded not just to any story, but to specific ones. They understood that while the past couldn't be erased, they had the power to shape their future by learning from their mistakes. Celebrating their victories and honoring their stories, together they rebuilt their homes and their lives, creating a stronger, more resilient community than before. As they shared these stories around the flame, it reacted in incredible ways, becoming brighter, dancing, and even changing colors. In turn, this fostered a deeper sense of community and empathy among the storytellers, strengthening their bonds and creating a rich tapestry of shared experiences and emotions. And so the legend of the memory flame continued to be passed down through generations, keeping their culture alive and reminding them of their strength and resilience. They realized the flame wasn't just reacting to the stories, it was absorbing them, remembering them, passing them down through generations. It seemed to react not just to the stories themselves, but to specific elements within them. Sometimes the flame would dance with excitement when a story involved bravery or adventure. Other times it would flicker softly when a tale spoke of love or loss. Ember was deeply moved by the stories she heard around the flame, realizing that each one held a unique power. Some brought joy, some sorrow, but all of them were important. Sometimes it flared up with excitement, other times it dimmed with sadness. One evening, a young girl named Ember stumbled upon an old cave rumored to hold a magical flame, a flame that remembered. News spread like wildfire, and soon Ember and others began visiting this sacred fire. Intrigued, Ember decided to research old texts, searching for clues. Days turned into weeks, and finally she found it, an inscription hinting at a special type of story, one that could awaken dormant powers within the flame. Excited, Ember shared this discovery with the others. Together, they set out on a mission to find these stories, unearthing long-forgotten tales, rekindling age-old traditions and weaving together a tapestry of stories that had been waiting for centuries to be heard once more. Discovered that the stories contained a unique code, encoded emotions, cultural memories, and hidden histories. As word spread about the flame that remembered, more and more people came to share their stories, seeking solace, connection, and understanding. Then one day, a terrible tragedy struck. A wildfire ripped through the land, destroying homes and leaving people traumatized. Inspired by the flame, the community came together to rebuild their lives, drawing strength from each other and their shared history. Now, whenever the memory flame flickers and dances, it's a reminder for them to cherish their stories, honor their ancestors, and face their future with courage and unity.
Ow.
If you enjoyed this enchanting tale of Ember and the memory flame, I have a treat for you. One evening, as Ember sat quietly by the flame, she began to notice patterns in its behavior. Determined to understand the flame's reactions, Ember started paying close attention to the stories she heard. After weeks of careful observation, Ember had uncovered a fascinating pattern. Realizing this, Ember began to see the flame as a mirror to their emotions, a reflection of the feelings they shared around the fire. This understanding brought a new depth to their storytelling. As a result, the flame became a living, breathing thing, reflecting the full spectrum of their emotions and helping them to process and understand the complexities of their feelings. And so, around the memory flame, they continued to share their stories, embracing the full range of human emotions and finding solace, connection, and growth in the flickering light. I hope you enjoyed this delightful tale. If you're eager to embark on more adventures with Ember and the memory flame, please don't hesitate to let me know. Once upon a time, maybe many years ago, maybe only yesterday, there was a candle in an abandoned room. It had never been lit. It wasn't broken. It wasn't old. It was just unnoticed. Dust had gathered on its wick. The wooden table beneath it creaked sometimes, but no one heard it. Time passed, and still the candle waited. This is the tale of the room that forgot to glow. The room belonged to no one now. There were no windows, no clock. It's just walls that used to be blue, now fading into gray. It's maybe 13, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big. Eyes like someone who had seen too much silence. She didn't say anything. She just sat on the floor beside the table and stared at the candle. Small, still, slightly trembling, like it too wasn't sure it should be alive. The girl stared at it. Not bright. Just enough to remind the walls they once had color. The floor, it creaked again, but this time it sounded like a sigh. Not sad, just relieved, and whispered, "You waited." The flame flickered once. You can talk about the characters, the plot, the setting, writing style, or any other aspect of the story that you want to discuss. Share your thoughts, feelings, and interpretations. Ask questions. What did you like about the story? What didn't you like? How did it make you feel? How did you interpret certain actions, events, or symbols? What do you think the story is trying to say or teach us? How does the story connect to other stories or experiences? Is there anything confusing or unclear in the story? What would you have done differently if you were the main character? What do you think happens after the story ends? Do you have any theories? What kind of person do you think the author is? How do you know? How does the story reflect the author's beliefs, values, or experiences? Do you agree or disagree with the author's views? What do you think the story is about? What is the main message or lesson? What is the significance of the title? How does it relate to the overall theme of the story? Eventually, the candle burned out. Its wax cooled, its wick turned to dust. I'm here to listen and learn from you. Let's have a respectful and thoughtful conversation about this story. And who knows, maybe we'll discover something new or gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. So let's begin. What do you think about this story?
Sure.
But there was a sentence written in charcoal on the wall. Sometimes a single flame is enough to make silence feel like company. And under it, a matchbox, empty but warm. But for those hours, it had done something incredible. It had been seen, not with wonder, just sometimes wind crept under the door. It would nudge the curtain. It pushed the dust across the floor, but it never touched the candle. The candle stood still, not dancing, just breathing. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm. Nothing. Twice. A spark. She looked at the candle and asked quietly, "If I light you, will anything change?" The candle said nothing. She struck the match again. This time, it held, like a forgotten promise. One day, years later, someone entered. A girl, maybe 12. Minutes passed, then hours. At some point, her head rested on the edge of the table. She fell asleep. In her pocket, she found a match. It was bent. Damp at the edge. She struck it once. The candle was still lit, a little shorter, a little softer. She didn't say anything. She stood up, looked around the empty room, and left. She left the candle burning. When the candle lit, nothing magical happened. No wind swirled, no music played, no secret passage opened. The flame just sat there. She didn't leave. She didn't cry. She didn't speak again. She just sat there, watching the flame. The candle didn't melt fast. It burned slowly. So slowly, it felt like it was trying to stay. The shadows moved gently around the room. When the sun finally touched the corner of the wall, the girl opened her eyes. For the first time in what felt like 100 years, the room had a glow. No one ever came to that room again. Not that week, not that year. Years later, a child found the room, empty. Let's talk about this story. What did you think? Did you like it? Why or why not? And remember, there are no right or wrong answers when discussing literature. Everyone has their own unique perspective and interpretation, so feel free to share yours. There was a man. He lived alone in a small wooden house on the edge of a field that no one walked through anymore. He wasn't sad. He wasn't happy. He was just there, existing like an old chair. No one moved, but also never sat in. In the center of his house was a stone fireplace. Once, it burned every night. Once it held laughter. Once, it held family. Now, it held nothing. It's just blackened walls. Cold ash. Watch the field. Do nothing. Wait for night. Atwood. Stacked in the corner, matches in a tin. And candles untouched in the drawer. But he didn't light them. Not even once. Even the trees stood still, as if afraid to disturb him. But now, the candle was there, staring back at him, still unlit, waiting. And the man much younger, smiling a smile that didn't belong to this version of him. Not from anything burning, just a trace, like memory dusting through the house. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe not. He cleaned it silently, then opened the drawer, took out one more candle. The candlelight in the photo glowed. But in real life, that light was long gone. Just a flicker in his eyes, in a room that was no longer completely dark. Still unlit. But he took a match from the tin, struck it once, failed twice. Still nothing. Third time it flared. It's not bright, not strong, just there. He paused, then finally. He lit the first candle. And on the wall above the fireplace, written faintly in charcoal, sitting on a rock, staring into the distance. He didn't read, he didn't speak, he just sat in the dark, reflected in the glass of the photo frame above. The people in the picture seemed closer, so he stayed silent too. But then he did something. He took a candle from his pocket. And when the candle burned out, he said, "Greater than I thought you might need this." He lit it. The flame danced in the wind. It cast shadows on her face. And for a moment, she smiled. Almost like they were watching. About the photograph in the dust. And he realized she was right. It wasn't about candles. It wasn't a ritual. It wasn't for anyone else. It was just what needed to happen. And a silence that had long forgotten how to echo. And for the first time in years, he leaned forward. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt something other than nothing. Not to stand, just to feel the warmth. Each day was the same. Wake before sunrise. Wash his face in cold water. Sit at the table, not eating. Ones that smelled like apples. Ones that smelled like rain. Sometimes she would light them all. Fill the room with color and scent. In a drawer he almost never opened, there was a box of old candles, some bent, some melted flat on one side, some still wrapped in yellowed paper. They were not expensive, but they were heavy with meaning. He touched them sometimes, but never lit them. He opened it. And on the other side stood a woman holding out a candle. Sometimes she visited, she brought food, sometimes she brought stories, Sometimes she just sat in the corner and cried. Evening was always the same. He would sit in his old chair by the empty fireplace. Outside, the wind moved slowly. Birds didn't sing anymore.